Well, hello, Ginger.
Hello, Denelle. How are you?
It's so nice to have you here. It's an honor to welcome you to Meridian, our 5th Meridian, which is pretty awesome. You're now the Chief Network Operator at Plaid.
That's correct, yes.
And I want to dig into that a bit and how your journey there, but you spent so much of your career focused on financial access and financial inclusion, and it took you kind of everywhere in the world. And there are a lot of learnings that we can take from you with respect to that because of the work that you've had. So I want to spend a lot of time focusing there on how you've made a real impact in terms of that kind of piece. But
Sounds
first, I want to ask you, this is your first Meridian.
It is.
What do you think?
So I've had a couple of observations about Meridian. The first didn't actually happen here at the venue, but happened yesterday in a hotel that I'm pretty sure many of us are staying in, when I observed two people. I'm not going to say what shirts they were wearing or what logos they had on their shirts, but they were moving between hotel rooms on one of the floors of the hotel, like in socks, t-shirts, with their computers open, clearly working on something together. And it was just such a breath of fresh air. It was just so delightful to see that kind of collaboration happening, I think, even before the event officially began. But the vibrancy of this community and seeing so many people working together to bring new products and solutions to life is just, it's great to be here and be a part of it. I was also delighted to see Alex's presentation about MoneyGram's launch today. I'm kind of, yay, MoneyGram. But I mean, it's not just yay MoneyGram, it's yay the intersection of traditional companies and offline human infrastructure that is required to make the digital services that we all build and love successful. And so hearing him talk was a real beautiful moment for me of seeing the kind of combination and beauty that can happen when you have a company that's really perfected the hardest part of digital financial services, which is those on-ramps and off-ramps, and seeing that combine with a stable coin solution. It was fantastic. So I was really elated. So Meridian's great so far. Denelle, thanks for asking.
I think what you just highlighted there in terms of that bridge between the physical and the digital, you have so much experience in trying to create that bridge in different ways. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Sure. So I guess you could sort of break it into 3 parts. I do care about the physical and digital, but I think the theme I've tried to create my career around has been the intersection of technology and financial services. I started my career in a global payment network, so I spent that first phase of my career learning about global payments, but also just figuring out how to be an adult and like do adult type things. Then I decided to go back to graduate school and spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs in Sub-Saharan Africa. And as part of that experience, I was tempted to move away from financial services because I thought my day-to-day job wasn't relevant and meaningful enough in terms of driving impact for everyday people. So I was looking to move on to something else. And I had applied to graduate school and I was studying international affairs. But I took a couple of internships in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in working with the entrepreneurs in those countries like Tanzania and Ghana, they repeatedly told me it was actually access to financial services that they wanted. It wasn't the policies that we were coming up with around climate. It wasn't the business plans I was helping them create as a person with zero education on Ghana from California, telling them how to run their business. Like, that was not what they needed. They actually just wanted access to capital. And so I realized that actually working for a global payment network had given me a foundation to build from. So since that realization and revelation, I guess, I've sort of focused on how different technological or cultural trends can be leveraged to drive meaningful impact in financial inclusion. So early on, it was like just the proliferation of mobile devices that was happening around the world. I mean, basic Nokia devices could be turned into bank accounts. I found that fascinating. So I worked with Visa in Sub-Saharan Africa doing that. Then again, with smartphones, I worked with Square and enabling small businesses to mobilize their businesses to the places that they needed to be to make the sales that they wanted to sell. Then I went into big tech to study how social networks and social connectedness through apps can actually drive access to financial services. And then for the last couple of years, I've sort of been focused on the infrastructure and platform components, both at Ripple and now at Plaid. How are the guts of what has to exist in order to enable people to have financial inclusion? How are they best built? How can they be better evolved? And how do they actually drive connectedness for all of us?
So I'm going to take you off a little bit and just say it's so interesting listening to what your background, the journey has been. So was there anything that sort of forced you in this direction from like your childhood and like how you were growing up?
I mean, I did have some pretty eye-opening international experiences when I was in high school. And I was doing some volunteer work in a small village in Venezuela when I was a senior in high school. And that was a moment for me that I thought, wow, like there's certainly a lot that I have access to that the people here do not. And I can't figure out any good reason why that's the case, right? It's just so happened I was born in a different country, born into a different family. Like, so why is my life so different? And how can I help to ensure that whatever opportunities have been given to me simply because I happen to be born into the place that I was born can also be delivered to other people? So that may have been a
sort of a moment.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that we always try to get right, because I think it's really, really, really important, but it's really hard to define, is that we talk about financial access. And lots of people talk about financial inclusion.
Yeah.
And we try to stay on the access piece because I think that's where we best sit. But why don't you help us on the definition of financial access versus financial inclusion?
Okay. So this is like, Webster's Dictionary, Ginger Baker version 1.0. So my thought on this is that financial access is the building blocks for financial inclusion. Financial access can be defined as access to a capability or an identity or a regulation or an account or a mobile phone or an internet connection. You need to have building blocks that are going to enable financial inclusion. But financial access on its own is not sufficient for financial inclusion. Inclusion requires building products and solutions that are relevant and meaningful and meet a person where they are in their life to do the job that they need to have done. And that takes a lot more work and a lot more research and listening and intuiting than simply financial access can do. And in fact, I just had, previous to my current title, I was the head of financial access at Plaid. And that is very simply ensuring that a consumer or a person has the right to access their financial data regardless of what account it might sit in. So is that financial inclusion? No, it's not. It's simply one very important building block around access to, in that case, financial data that helps to build financial inclusion and build solutions that enable that. So yeah, I think that's my take on it.
I think it's so important that we speak the same language around this. And you'll hear that a lot of times we focus on our mission, which is about creating equitable access to the global financial system. I would love for us to impact financial inclusion as well, but that's not what we're building. That's not the tools that we're building. That's the stuff that you guys are building.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for us to get the words right, and that's why I think it's great for us to have like the same sort of definition as we get there. You've had incredible on-the-ground experiences in a lot of the work that you've done. And I thought maybe you could take us a little bit on your journey with Visa in Rwanda, because I think it's so interesting, not only what you did, but also what you learned.
Yeah, sure. So this was a decade ago, not to date myself, but a lot of things have changed, but also so many things are exactly the same, which is why the learnings are still quite relevant. So a little bit of context. This was in 2010. Visa decided that it needed new business models and products to have greater penetration in emerging markets. Credit card adoption in emerging markets at that time was probably between 1% and 5%, depending on which market you were in. And so how was Visa going to expand its overall customer base if it didn't have solutions that made sense for mass market consumers and emerging markets in those countries? So we set out on this project to identify which product did we want to build or business model did we want to create, and where did we want to launch that experience. The market selection was actually super easy. For those of you familiar with Rwanda, it is a really unique model for economic development. It has a very private sector-led agenda. There's very low crime and low corruption in Rwanda. The government is very organized, so things get executed very, very quickly. For example, they rolled out a national ID to like 95% of adults in 3 days because they decided everybody needed to have an ID, and they just got it done. So it's a phenomenal country. And they were also very eager to support Fortune 500 companies who were looking to build sustainable business models. This was not a CSR program or corporate responsibility. And so we easily chose Rwanda as the market for our product. The product, though, in that definition, took a little bit more thought. And I had a moment when we had reviewed a lot of markets, so I spent a lot of time in a number of different countries in sub-Saharan Africa at that time. And one of them was Tanzania. And I was standing on a street corner in Dar es Salaam and looking around at the mobile money agents and mobile money shops, like where people would go to buy airtime top-up and scratch cards. And on that corner that I was standing on, there was a little retail shop that had 4 different decals on the front of the shop. It had Zantel, Airtel, Vodacom, and Tigo were the 4 telcos. And I was looking at that sign and thinking, isn't that interesting, right? The whole reason Visa and MasterCard had been created was that when like credit and debit card networks were built, you could have a number of different decals from banks on the front of a store. But when you go to a deli in New York today, you don't see the decals of the banks on the front of that shop. You don't see Chase, Bank of America, First Horizon Bank, Wells Fargo. You just see Visa or you see MasterCard. And so that's because there's interoperability between the issuers of cards and the acceptors of cards. So why couldn't we do the same thing? Why couldn't we build interoperability into mobile money agents? And so that was the project, and we kicked off and launched a low-cost money movement platform that pushed funds from one point to the other. The thing that I really loved about that product is that it didn't matter if you were a person sending to a person, or a business receiving money from a person, or a government distributing to a person. It was all treated fairly equally. And I loved it. I mean, I was really proud of that platform. And I'll emphasize that word for a sec, because I think we got the platform right, but that's not all that matters, right? There's a lot that goes on top of that platform to actually make it usable. So we got the access piece right, perhaps, but maybe not the inclusion part right. And so, yes, that was what we did in Rwanda.
And so it sounds like you got the access part right, but then were there challenges that you faced to get to the inclusion part, to make the impact that you wanted to make?
Yeah, so there were a few things that were playing to our favor and a few things that did not. One, as I mentioned, Rwanda is a very private sector-led development, has a private sector-led development agenda. And we partnered with the government in a public-private partnership. That makes all the difference in the world. If you are a big company trying to do things in a small country, the government has so much say over what opportunities are opened up, what infrastructure they want to build. This national ID program was in the process of being developed as we were entering the market. And having access to the government's intentions and agenda just really helped us to be opportunistic about the things that we wanted to build. The second thing is that we worked with local companies and tried to build something that was like accretive. How are we going to help everybody drive inclusion through the products that they're offering? But the things that we didn't do so well were understand why people might want to use this interesting low-cost money movement platform that we were so proud of. And we tried lots of different use cases. Our first assumption was that people would just simply go to a mobile money agent that we had branded M-Visa and load cash in, and then use the digital money on their phone to send money to friends. Like, why wouldn't you do that? That seems like a great idea. But there are so many things about that just didn't work. One, cash is a very formidable competitor. Whoever the product manager is for cash is like a phenomenal PM, right? Because cash is it's tangible, it's visibly recognizable, it's accepted almost everywhere, it's portable, you can stick it in your pocket, you can give it to a friend. I mean, it's a great product. It also even has security features built in if you've taken a look at a dollar bill recently. But so we weren't quite prepared.
It's so funny to think about the product owner of cash. I guess that's the Fed in the United States. And in most countries, I think it's the central bank. So I'm not sure that they think about it as a product.
No, actually, I was talking to someone at the Fed in the United States recently. This was a couple of months ago. And I made some sort of comment about how we can't solve financial inclusion until we get rid of cash. Like, cash is the enemy. And he very rightfully said, I beg to differ. I actually think cash is the most inclusive financial product. And so, touche.
As long as you can get your hands on it.
Yeah, touche to the Fed, touche to the Fed. So we had a lot of learning to do about what were the kinds of use cases that resonated. I think one great learning for us is that actually people are really motivated to get paid. So of all the different use cases that we had built on top of this great platform, the ones that took off were salary disbursements from the government to people that were employed by the government, and then loan disbursements, where groups of women were receiving their loan payments, and then they would go to an agent to pay back the loan once a week instead of handling cash. That was a safer product for them. It also allowed them to receive the loan. And so that motivation really got people over the barrier of having to learn a new technology. I think the other thing that really played against us is like there's some complexity to understanding how to create these kinds of solutions in markets that you don't fully understand. For example, we had an American, had written out what the USSD menu options were going to be. Send money, cash out. Those were the words that we wanted to show up in the USSD menu and M-Visa. And that's great. Those are about like 7 to 9 characters in length. But when you translate, people don't speak English in Rwanda, right? They speak Kinyarwanda. When you translate cash out or send money into Kinyarwanda, it's no longer 7 to 9 characters. It's now like 15 to 20 characters, which actually doesn't fit on the USSD menu. So like the product just was bad. Like you couldn't really use it. The complexity of the agent was challenging. I mean, it was great in many ways. I'm not trying to make it sound so terrible, but it was challenging.
Well, you did tell me a story about one of the, was it in Rwanda that it was a product owner that didn't want to use the product, or was that?
Oh, no, the guy that worked for me? Yeah, I was going to get to that story later, but I'm happy to tell it now.
Yeah, go ahead and tell it now.
Okay,
I
I'm going to
love
tell it now. Okay, so this was a particularly humbling experience for me because when we started this project, we had done a lot of research, right? Economic research about different market segments in the country. We had identified the kinds of people that we thought were the exact target market for this product. And they were generally banked but underbanked. So they had an account, so they had some familiarity with financial services. They were digitally literate but not like digitally savvy. They probably had family in the country. Maybe they were salaried. So we were trying to define like the target market for the product. And literally the target market was George. He was our night guard, so he sat outside of our house and was our security guard in the evenings in Kigali. George refused to use M-Visa. I mean, this was a product that took me 3 years to get off the ground. I like moved my family to Rwanda to do this project, and this guy worked for me for 3 years and would not use it. And I couldn't understand why. I kept saying, like, George, like, the agent is literally 2 blocks away. You just walk to the agent. You have the phone. Like, just deposit the cash. Like, it's so easy. It's actually free. It's free to deposit the cash, and the account is free. He would not do it. So I was like, well, just talk to me about what you actually do. And so he used a SACCO. He had 2 different savings programs. One was a formal SACCO, like a savings cooperative, and one was like a neighborhood-based cooperative. And so he loved the SACCO that he used in town. And I said, well, how do you get there? And he said, well, I take a moto, and it takes me about 10 minutes to get into town. And I was like, well, why do you like it so much? And he's like, well, I don't really like the account, and I don't really like the SACCO. They don't treat me very well, and I don't get the service that I need. I was like, well, then why wouldn't you just do the thing that's free 2 blocks away? And he's like, well, the SACCO has air conditioning. And so on the weekends, I like to take the moto into town, and I like to stand in the SACCO in the air conditioning, and sometimes my friends are there, so we just hang out at the SACCO in the air conditioning. And I was like, so you can build a great platform, you can build amazing use cases, but you also really need to deeply understand the emotional and cultural drivers that exist in the markets where you're working, so you know whether or not you can beat air conditioning or not with your product. But that was definitely not something I thought we were going to be competing against.
Well, it's so funny. This is exactly what I always say, is one of the things I love about what we're doing with Stellar is that for years in Silicon Valley, I've always been told that we need to build products for the world. And it was always frustrating to me because I'm like, we don't even know the world. The world knows the world better than we do. How can we build products for it? And this is a perfect example of you can't. And this is why local builders solving local problems and having an open network to do it, it makes me so happy to bridge those together. So that story is sort of, so hits the mark on that. So much of what you've done is focused on this financial access, and you've done it a lot in countries outside of the United States, even though you came from the United States. And a lot of your focus has been on women. And it's been on empowering women through these tools or doing other things. And why have you focused there?
Yeah, so I think we can all read the research that probably the World Bank and other institutions have provided about why investing in women is good for countries, it's good for education, it's good for healthcare. I think as a woman's income rises, the health improvements of their children increase like 4 to 7-fold, something like that. So there's some great statistics on why investing in women is good for families, economies, in the world, frankly. But that's not why I became so interested in looking at women as a target segment. I think, one, I've just been so fascinated by, like, women are human versions of Excel spreadsheets, And I think it's really amazing, all of the work that gets done in some of these families. And I'll give you the example. So we were doing some ethnographic research to frame the project that I ran at Facebook called Mobile Financial Services. I can talk more about that in a bit. But part of the research was going around to a couple of emerging markets and doing some research on women. And we were interviewing a woman in Bangladesh who was talking about her role in the family and how much pride she got from being the person who could manage the budget. And when I say manage the budget, I mean she knew where all the money was at all times. So she knew exactly how much she had given to her sister to hold for safekeeping. She knew the amount that was in the canister in the kitchen. She also knew the debts that were upcoming or that needed to be paid. She knew that they had borrowed money from the neighbor. She also knew to the amount and the date what day the school fees were due for her children. She understood what seasonality her husband's income might go through. If he was a fruit vendor and fruits were harvested at different times, she understood in her brain, with no spreadsheet, when income may taper off and when it may rise again, and therefore what savings percentages, although she didn't say percentages, she needed to put away to guard through those lean times. I just couldn't believe it, right? Like, this is like a highly functioning machine, right? And I thought, they're simple solutions to take the work. Like, if you talk about jobs to be done, like Clayton Christensen, like, this is a job to be done, right? Someone is trying to use so much brain capacity to manage their family budget. Like, why can't we give them digital tools to do the same thing? And so I got really excited about that type of work. And the work that we ended up doing in the Philippines, actually based on some of this research in Bangladesh, is we were creating tools within our messaging applications. So in the Philippines, it was Messenger because it's used by 60% of the it was used by 60% of the adult population in like 2017. But at the time, only about 35% of adults in the Philippines had bank accounts. So if you think about that delta, 35% of people with a bank account, 60% with access to Messenger on a regular basis and using it, we were looking at that 25% difference and how we could close the gap in financial inclusion through the use of our messaging platforms. And so we looked at all these different use cases. We focused on use cases that women were more likely to be involved in, things like utility bill payments, which was primarily the woman's job to pay, sending overseas foreign worker payments into the country, and then also receiving and sending remittances domestically. So we built a product around women and women's needs. Obviously, men used it too, but we were certainly like mindful of that, thinking about the longer term outcomes that could generate. But what was interesting about that project is like it wasn't just women as users of the product. We also needed local agent networks to get money in and money out. As I mentioned, thanks to MoneyGram. And we used the subsidiaries of the major telcos had mobile money services there. So Paymaya had, Smart had a Paymaya solution. Gcash had Globe had Gcash. So we used these local agents, but 60% of those agents were women. So they were running the local businesses that were being trained to take on this new product that they were selling in their shops. So now, in addition to selling small packs of shampoo, rice, different kinds of things for your household, and airtime, top-up, scratch cards, they were also now selling access to digital currency. And like that was just a really cool realization, is that it wasn't just the women who were using the product, but 60% of the women were forming the backbone of what was required to get funds in and out of the system.
So you've talked a lot about what you've done and the work that you've done in these markets to be able to try to help to bridge that financial inclusion gap. Is there advice that you can give based on all of this and based on your learnings, like in the visa situation and other learnings that you've had that you can give to people on how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, lots of learnings. I think I think a lot of people assume you can port a product that's been successful in one country to another country and have the same level of success. I don't think that. I mean, I guess M-Pesa was probably the first example of that not working, right? And M-Pesa has had success since, but it took them a long time to figure out how to let the markets, what would resonate in the markets. And I think I've learned the same thing over and over again. The bill payment solution and airtime top-up that worked in the Philippines, when we eventually brought the same product with Facebook to Peru, those were not the things that people needed. So be very careful about the idea of porting something over. And then like user interface and technology, we think it solves all the problems. It can actually really complicate the products that you're building. One example on this bill payment solution we had launched in the Philippines is that it was created it was through bots actually in Messenger. So a bot would pop up and ask you for your bill number, which you had on your monthly statement. That's a fairly easy thing to find. So you would find the bill number, and then you would enter the bill number in and the amount, and then you would pay from your digital wallet. That saved you the trip to the local Biad, bill payment shop. It saved you the bus fare. But the bill is actually not that easy to navigate. So you have to listen to the people in the market telling you when things are hard. So they would say, like, bill payment, the bill is confusing. You're like, it's not that confusing. You just find the account number and you send it. Well, the utility bill companies in the Philippines change the account number every month when they send the bill. And it's like 17 digits long. So the person has to find the new number each time and then figure out how to enter it in. And if you make a mistake and you've sent it to the wrong bill, like, that is extremely costly. Bill payment is like 30% of a average Filipino family monthly incomes. Like, that's an expensive mistake to make. So, like, you can't expect people to adopt digital financial services for the first time with that amount of risk and that amount of complexity. Even though we thought it was like, oh, we're using messenger bots and everybody loves Messenger, this is going to be so easy. Actually, when you really look at the details of what had to be solved, it was quite complicated.
So we're coming up on time, but I have one more question I want to ask you, because I think probably, given all of your experience and your work with Ripple before, is it the financial access piece that drew you to Stellar, or what drew you to us?
Oh, well, Denelle drew me to Stellar.
I didn't mention that Ginger, and I think most of you know this, but Ginger is on our board, and we are so lucky to have her. So.
Well, I'm very fortunate to be a part of this community, so thank you all for having me. I'm not kidding that Denelle was a big driver of my wanting to join the board. But after I left Rwanda and the work that we had done to create interoperability in mobile money, I read a paper that Jed wrote. Jed's probably out there. Jed, thank you for writing the paper. I can't remember the name of it, but it was definitely probably a decade ago, maybe 8 years ago. And I remember reading it. It was a paper about how Stellar could drive global interoperability. And I remember reading it and thinking, like, wait, this is what I meant. This is what I meant when I said interoperability in mobile money. I didn't just mean interoperability for a group of companies that happen to be principal licensees of a major payment network. That's actually not open interoperability. That is a closed system. And this was a paper about opening that system. And I understood the benefits of interoperability. I had just been building with it, right? And I knew what it could create in the world, but it wasn't open. And so when I read that paper, it really motivated me to learn more about Stellar. But it wasn't until I actually got into some of the challenges with the lack of interconnectedness with my role at Facebook that I really got motivated around blockchain and wanting to explore Stellar more. I mean, if you think about the kinds of digital platforms that exist today, like, imagine Facebook only sharing the photos that you post online with the telco that your friends use. So I use AT&T. I post a picture onto my news feed on Facebook. What would it look like if only people on AT&T could see that picture? Or what if I wanted to send texts on WhatsApp, but it only allowed me to send texts within a country? I could only send them in Spain. Or what if I wanted to send sticker packs and Messenger to my friends in Thailand, but it mattered who they banked with, or anything? Like, that doesn't make any sense for the kinds of systems that work today. So we need that, like, interconnectedness that manages, like, how our lives work, how our products work, how our relationships work, how businesses work. Like, we need money to match the world that we live in, and Stellar is building that type of money, and so I'm elated to be a part of the board.
Well, thank you so much, Ginger. And your work has been an inspiration, certainly for me, and I think that the focus on financial access and then how we can achieve financial inclusion, leveraging that access with folks like you in the room, is something that we want to continue to spend a lot of time on. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings me to our next piece of content, which is I'm going to invite Lauren and Keith up on stage. Not Keith, Kurt. It's a K. I was like, it's not Keith. Yesterday, we launched with PwC US. One of the questions that I get asked all the time, I was just asked this actually, those of you who were at MainNet last week, I was asked this to say, well, how do you know if you're actually impacting and creating an impact on financial inclusion? What are the numbers? Like, tell us what you know. Blockchain is out there and it's transparent. You can see it. How do you make that happen? And the answer is, nobody has actually cracked the nut to figure out how to do that. But we, working with PwC to create this framework, PwC US, to create a framework to really pull together, like, how you think about that impact and how you can make that impact more visible and share that with the world. And it's not just for Stellar. It's actually for any blockchain and any activity that's happening out there for financial inclusion. And I'm going to hand it over to two people who led this work to share more. So let me bring up Lauren and Kurt, not Keith, Fields, the blockchain lead for PwC US.